Okay, welcome everybody to Public Schools First NC, our forum for tonight. We're really oops, I'm on the wrong place, y'all. We were practicing earlier, you know how that goes, and I forgot to switch the slides back. But this is our presentation on the negative impact of charter schools in our local school districts. You know, a lot of people do ask me when we were advertising this webinar, like, why are we still talking about charter schools? And the reason we're still talking about charter schools is because Public Schools First NC, when we started our journey of public education advocacy, made the principled, we think, decision that we felt strongly that having one system of public schooling was the most efficient and effective mode of education for our taxpayers and for our children, right? Outcomes for our children and money spent by our taxpayers. So we feel very strongly that that's something we should still honor. Charter schools are here. They are operating in many counties. There's over like 200 some now, 206. But one of the things that we still are concerned about is a lot of the charter schools are not spending their money efficiently. They're not spending it appropriately. The outcomes for children have not improved. They're not sharing information, these kind of things. We'll talk a lot about this tonight. And furthermore, the really scary thing is when they're undermining the local public school system. So we are really excited tonight to have with us two people who are very involved at the local level. First, I'd like to introduce to you Rodney Pierce. Rodney is a middle school social studies teacher in Eastern North Carolina, where he has seen the impact of charter school growth on public schools. Rodney was the 2019 North Carolina Council for the Social Studies Teacher of the Year and the inaugural Teacher Fellow for the North Carolina Equity Fellowship through the Center for Racial Equality and Equity in Education. Rodney is a fellow of the Carolina Public Humanities, the UNC Chapel Hill Southern Oral History Program, and the North Carolina Public School Forum's Education Policy Fellowship. So welcome Rodney here with us tonight. Also joining Rodney is Christine Kushner. Christine Kushner is a professional public policy analyst, a freelance writer from Raleigh, North Carolina. Christine served on the Wake County Board of Education from December 2011 to December 2022, including 2 terms as chair of the board. During her time on the Board of Education, the number of charter schools doubles as the statewide cap was lifted and eligibility requirements were loosened. She currently serves on the Wake County Health and Human Services Board, the Post Center for Health Education Board of Directors, and on the Public Schools First NC Advocacy Board. So welcome, Christine. As you can see, we have 2 wonderful, knowledgeable speakers tonight. I do want to say one thing before I turn it over to Heather Coons, our communications director. Feel free to gather your questions together. We will have time. We're going to leave plenty of time for questions and answers and comments at the end. If you have a burning question that you don't want to forget, put it in the chat and we will get around to it at some point, okay? So without any further delay, I would like to ask Heather, if you would talk a little bit to give us some background about the charter school situation in North Carolina.
I will. Can you share your slides, Yvonne?
You can't see them?
Nope.
Well,
I should have mentioned that earlier because as you were introducing Christine and Rodney, we had slides to introduce them. But we have just been having a conversation directly with you so far.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Okay.
There we go.
How's that?
That is great.
Well, look, y'all, you understand that good is the new perfect, right? Okay.
Yeah. So can you go up one?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. So everybody, thanks for joining us tonight. My role here is just to share a little bit of background on charter schools and their growth. and admit people as they come in. And
I'll take over
and,
here. I'll do that.
Rodney will, I'll quickly turn it over to Rodney and Christine. So the Charter School Act, as you can see here, passed more than 20 years ago in 1996. And under its provisions, up to 100 charter schools total were allowed across the state. Every year, new charter schools opened, and every year a few closed. So even after the total schools neared 100, as you can see here, there was room for for new charters to open. Even so, in 2011, Senate Bill 8 was passed. And Senate Bill 8 removed the 100 school limit on charters, and also reduced limits on school enrollment requirements and other regulations. So for example, the initial legislation required charter school enrollment to reflect the demographics of the local community. And in 2011, that was loosened. So now that the requirement is just that charter schools have to show a plan and show an attempt to reflect the local demographics. And you can imagine what's happened. The number of charter schools, as you can see, grew fast, and now there are 206 in North Carolina. So they doubled pretty quickly. And as the numbers increased, so did the number of enrolled students and the money spent on charters. And in 2023, 9%, almost 9% of the students in North Carolina attended charter schools, and almost $1 billion. And I have the specific amount there. This year alone, that's in 1 year, transferred out of local districts and was sent to charter schools. It's a huge amount coming out of the public schools or traditional public schools. But while the charter school growth has gone quite rapidly, charter school staff numbers haven't kept up with charter school growth. And this is a really big problem because the staff are in charge of reviewing applications. They're in charge of monitoring compliance. And there aren't enough staff to support and monitor low-performing schools and evaluate how well they're adhering to their school improvement plans. So we have a number of low-performing charters, but there's no staff at DPI to give them the support they need. And it's just a really big problem in terms of across the whole spectrum in charter schools. So things have been a little bit wild. Just one more thing I want to touch on before Rodney starts his part of the presentation. Charter school performance. So one thing Public Schools First focuses on is growth. And the data has shown us that traditional public schools have consistently outperformed charter schools in terms of student academic growth. So this notion that they're going to provide this better academic environment for students, that their students are really going to grow and thrive academically is just not shown in the data. So for the past 4 reporting years, between 71 and 75% of traditional charter schools have, or excuse me, 71 and 75% of traditional public schools have met or exceeded growth targets. And charter schools have lower percentages at that point, between 5 and 7 percentage points lower each year than traditional public schools. And in 2021-22, a third of the charter schools were either low performing or consistently low performing. And there's a lot of requirements. So one of the things about charter schools is the regulations are relaxed a little bit, and that is supposed to improve performance and other aspects. And that's, it doesn't necessarily happen, but Rodney is going to take over from here and continue on sharing information. He's up the slide, Yvonne, he's going to talk about that slide. Can you go back a slide to the chart?
This slide here?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, excuse me. Sorry, Rodney.
No, go ahead. Going up. You can go up one slide. Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Pleasure to be on this call. Thank you, Yvonne, Heather, and Public Schools First. NC for inviting me to be a part of this with my good friend and colleague, Christine Kushner. Ladies and gentlemen, I reside in Halifax County. I'm a native of the area, grew up here, still reside here, taught here, worked here, all those good things. And what I want to enlighten you about tonight is a local charter school in my county. We have two, but I'm going to focus on one because I think the story of this institution becoming a charter school is something that needs to be highlighted in this discussion statewide about charter schools. It has been talked about in the media in terms of the News and Observer, in terms of the Washington Post even, but I'm going to give you a little deeper dive as quick as I can about this school. It is Hobgood Charter School. As you can see through the slide, it opened in August of 2019 in Halifax County in the town of Hobgood after its third application was unanimously approved by the State Board of Education. The school's application stated that the potential exists to turn the tide of poverty in this community through excellence in education, and it referred to the town of Hobgood as the perfect place to impact the most vulnerable of our children. Halifax County has been a Tier 1 county for decades. If you're familiar with our tier system here in North Carolina by our Department of Commerce, Tier 1 counties are the most economically distressed. And I would suffice to say that the majority of traditional public schools, if not all public schools in Halifax County, regardless of district, are not only Tier 1 schools, but also Title I schools. So they're just to give you an idea of the poverty that we face in our community. Hobgood Charter was previously, though, Hobgood Academy, which was founded in 1969 and opened in 1970. So you're talking about 50 years existing as a private school, and now all of a sudden you're switching up to a charter. Now, this school was founded as a private academy after the United States Justice Department rejected the Halifax County School District's desegregation plan because it did not comply with the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Now, Hobgood was not the only private academy that had been founded in Halifax County in 1969. We already had Enfield Academy. I can't remember the exact year, but I think Enfield Academy was actually founded in the 50s. But the same year Hobgood was founded, 1969, you also had Halifax Academy. Halifax Academy is still a private school today. All right. So what happened in 1964? Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed. That's 10 years after Brown versus Board of Education, the decision by the United States Supreme Court to desegregate public schools. In 1968, the United States Supreme Court, backed by the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, demanded immediate integration. What you saw happening at that time, you saw a steady, slow, kind of gradual growth of these segregation academies, these private schools that were opening up throughout North Carolina, basically for white students. But after the Department of HEW demanded immediate integration between 68 and 71, the number of segregation academies in North Carolina increased from 108 to 235. It more than doubled. And the majority of these white flight schools were located in the eastern part of the state, where Halifax County is located. We are in the northeastern region of North Carolina. And one more thing I want to say before you go to the next slide, Yvonne, is that the eastern part of the state is also where you had the highest enslaved populations during the antebellum era. Okay, most of these counties where these white flag academies were popping up, and still today, most of them predominantly Black. Okay, now, the next slide I'm going to show you after this one. Hold on, go back, go back. The next slide I want to show you, go back, please, Yvonne. I want you to remember, go back. I want you to remember where the town of Scotland Neck is compared to, well, thank you. Look where the town of Scotland Neck is down there in the southeastern part of Halifax County. Down there at the far southeastern part of Halifax County is the town of Hobgood. Okay, so you see they're close in vicinity, very close. Okay, now you can go. So the same year that desegregation plan is rejected by the United States Justice Department, Thorne Gregory, whose hometown is Scotland Neck, he was a state legislator representing Halifax County in the North Carolina House. He files a bill to establish a separate school district in his hometown of Scotland Neck. And his contemporary in the state Senate, the late Julian Alsbrook, pleaded the case for the bill to pass in his house of the General Assembly. Julian Alsbrook was a state senator, Thorne Gregory, a state rep. Remember how close those two communities are in terms of Hobgood and Scotland Neck. So let me also tell you something else about Julian Alsbrook. Julian Alsbrook also said, and I quote, this was at the 1956 annual convention of the North Carolina Democrats.
Rodney, we can't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
So we start back with telling us what was said in 1956.
I'm sorry. Julian Alsbrook said,
It
We
went
just
out
lost
again,
you again.
Rodney. It went out again, Rodney. It went out again.
Julian Alsbrook said, okay? You can go to the next slide. I want you to keep it in mind.
Rodney, we didn't hear that.
You missed it. I think the
We
ghost of
missed it.
Julian
Can you start
Alsbrook
over with what he said? Your audio went out again.
I'm sorry. My internet connection must be a little unstable out here in the boonies. Julian Alsbrook said that the fundamental question is whether the Anglo-Saxon race is to become a mongrel race. That was his quote. Did you get it that time?
Got it.
Okay. All right. So the bill that Thorne Gregory filed passes in February of 1969. And shortly thereafter, in June of that year, the Justice Department filed suit. So what happens in between that bill being passed and the lawsuit being filed? Hobgood Academy is being founded. So the lawsuit was called U.S. versus Scotland Neck City Board of Education, and it was decided in favor of the Justice Department in June of 1972. You can look this case up for yourself. Excuse me. But Hobgood had already been running a couple of years when that happened. So from 2010 to 2015, the enrollment at Hobgood Academy had been declining due to local economics and its $5,000 a year tuition. It had been staying afloat thanks to the state's Opportunity Scholarship Program. Now its application to become a charter was finally approved in February of 2019. At the time, Hobgood only had 98 students and the enrollment was 88% white. Now, when Hobgood was building up its campaign to become a charter, it started a website called Let's Charter Hobgood. One of the answers to a question on that website was that no current law forces any diversity, whether it be by age, sex, race, or creed. Now, a friend of mine, Justin Parmenter, who publishes a blog called Notes from the Chalkboard, he and I got together because when I saw that Hobgood was applying to become a charter, I knew this history that I'm sharing with you tonight. I tweeted about it. Justin wanted to publish it on his blog. That post on that blog got picked up by the Washington Post. When all of that happened, the access to Let's Charter Hobgood became restricted. Just so you know. Now, when Hobgood Academy was, when Hobgood Charter opened its doors in August of 2019, the North Carolina Director of Charter Schools, Dave Machado, forgive me if I'm mispronouncing the gentleman's name, visited, and he said, and I quote, "I think it's just exciting. I just think it's exciting to see this large population of diverse students." So let's look at the numbers when it comes to this diversity. For the 2019-2020 academic year, Hobgood had a student population of 223 students. 69% were white, 25% were Black, 6% were Hispanic. The following year, the student population increased to 276 students. 72% were white, 21% were Black, 6% Hispanic. For the 2021-22 academic year, you got 330 students. 77% are white, 18% are Black, 5% Hispanic. For this year, you have 404 students. 79% are white, 14% are Black, 5% Hispanic. Each year, the Hobgood Charter School has been in operation. It's getting closer and closer to that original student enrollment percentage of 88 that it had when it was still a private school. And each year, the Black student percentage has declined, as well as the Hispanic student percentage. Hobgood Charter has never had any more in any year it has operated as a charter than 59 Black students and 19 Hispanic students. But it has had upwards of over 300. It went from having 154 white students in its first year of operation to over 300 this year. So just sit with that. So when Hobgood Charter School's application was approved, the town of Hobgood was 49% Black. This is the community it serves. Now, most of that percentage who happen to be school-age kids were students naturally where? In Halifax County schools. The charter said it would use a weighted selection lottery with preference to low-income students. But again, it's never even had 60 Black students in a given year. By contrast, Halifax County Schools' Black student population has only decreased by 2% since 2019-2020. In 2019-2020, 83% of Halifax County Schools students were Black. In this year right here, 81% of its students are Black. You can go to the next slide. And I don't know if you know this or not, but Halifax County Schools is an original plaintiff in the nearly 30-year-old ongoing Leandro lawsuit. I am a Leandro kid. I was a sophomore in high school, giving away my age, when Leandro was filed. The lawsuit was actually filed in the Halifax County Superior Court and was first heard by the Honorable Richard Alsbrook. Guess who his daddy is? Julian Alsbrook. And it's been estimated that initially, when Hobgood Charter was first set up, that it would get up to $2 million in state funds from Halifax County Schools. Now, the enrollment has steadily increased each year, so I'm pretty sure it's not getting just $2 million anymore. But as an original Leandro plaintiff, can Halifax really afford to lose any more money? So this is that dichotomy that we're talking about in terms of charters, taking funds away from the traditional public schools and basically doing this job of resegregation. Look at the demographics of the schools within my county. Hobgood Charter, predominantly white. Roanoke Rapids Graded Schools, predominantly white. KIPP Halifax, the other charter that I spoke of earlier, as well as Weldon City Schools, which is the smallest district in terms of enrollment, and Halifax County Schools, both predominantly Black. So the traditional public schools were already segregated. The traditional public school districts were already segregated. I don't know if you know, but there are kids who live within the city limits of Roanoke Rapids Graded Schools, white or Black, who cannot attend, who live in the city limits of Roanoke Rapids, the city of Roanoke Rapids, who cannot attend Roanoke Rapids Graded Schools simply because they don't live within the school district lines. What year did the school district lines get readjusted in Roanoke Rapids Graded Schools? 1970. Real close to 1969, isn't it? Going all the way back to Halifax Academy being founded, Hobgood Academy being founded, and the Justice Department rejecting the desegregation plan from Halifax County Schools. So it can look like it's kind of ugly where I reside when it comes to race and education. But that's the type of deal that we're facing here in Halifax County as it pertains to education and funding and things of that nature. Again, I'm a Leandro kid. My 3 children all attend Halifax County schools. So I'm vested in this in terms of my district getting equal funding and charters being held accountable if they're going to call themselves public schools, just like traditional public schools are held accountable. Thank you.
All right, Rodney, thank you for that case study. And thank you, Yvonne and Heather, for inviting me here tonight to be with Dr. Pierce as he gives us his lecture. I'm Christine Kushner, served for 11 years on the Wake County Board of Education. I say I'm a recovering school board member in my first few months off the board, but remain strong and passionate advocate for public education here in North Carolina. And I'm increasingly continually concerned about the trends in our state, which 30 years ago and 20 years ago, we were a leader in our nation in public education. And here we are 20 years later. When my son started kindergarten in 2000, his school classroom was better funded and more supported than our current kindergarten classrooms. And that's a significant concern for me, and I continue to be an advocate for our public schools. So my main concern has been for the last 10 years is how charter schools interact with our local school systems. Charter schools are publicly funded, but they're largely privately organized and privately run. Many charters, both in North Carolina and in other parts of the country, claim that they're private entities, and so many do not feel they're subject to equal protection or non-discrimination laws. So I think it's a fuzzy line. Are they private schools or are they public schools? I think they tend to, they're publicly funded, so I feel they should have public accountability. Charter schools were intended to have open enrollment and be inclusive, but increasingly in North Carolina, our charter schools, as you know, they have lotteries, so they do not accept all students. And as a school board member, there were several anecdotal evidence I can give you that charters counsel away students who have specific special education needs. I've met parents who started in the charter school and then left the charter school and came to the public school. There's a lot of transience that is created by having charters within public school systems. So I would say that they are not inclusive of all students, and in many cases run themselves as exclusive schools. Next slide, please, Ms. Yvonne. They also have, very highly selective criteria, but I think that Milton Friedman in the 50s started the idea of school choice. He was an economist who was concerned about money. He was not someone concerned about academics. And so I think the decades-long experience with charter schools has indicated some very clear data, and there's strong evidence that charter schools have increased racial segregation in our schools. They make it much harder for traditional public schools to promote integration because parents have an out. And they have an out that is not regulated by a unified school system. There's decades-long data that shows that charter schools are more racially identifiable, both in North Carolina and nationally, than traditional public schools. And they make it much more difficult and fragmented for a public school system to have a coherent and enrollment process and a manner of having desegregation plans. It makes it much, much more difficult. So for decades, magnet schools have shown to be better options for school choice because by design and their purpose, their mission, magnets work to reduce racial isolation, and they reduce socioeconomic isolation of students. The stated purpose of magnet schools is to promote integration. And there's also decades of research that show that what has helped reduce achievement gaps, what has helped elevate achievement for both Black and Brown students and white students is school integration. It is a proven strategy, and our nation is moving further away from it than embracing it. And that is a huge concern that I've had as a school board member and as a parent. So I think we as a nation, our children deserve better and our taxpayers deserve better. Next slide, please. And I'm now, well, my gray hair will show you, a parent of 2 adult children. Both my children went through public schools and are doing so wonderfully. But I think as a taxpayer who does not have school-age children, I also deserve accountability and for our tax dollars. There are shared benefits from public schools. They are public goods and they need to be expansive. They need to have equitable amenities across schools so that children can access collective and benefits and can also access equal and equitable education across our systems instead of having fragmented systems that create have and have not systems. But I wanted this slide in particular to underscore that 70% of taxpayers are like me and do not have school-age children. And I expect a return on my tax dollar. I expect for the schools to be inclusive. I expect for the public schools that my taxes fund to be equitable. And I expect them to serve all children and and I want my money to have long-term investments. I don't want a for-profit charter coming in and skimming off money for out-of-state stockholders. I don't want a for-profit charter to build a building and flip it for real estate purposes. And that's happening in other parts of the country. And I want to make sure that my tax dollars go to long-term investments for public school children. North Carolina had some restrictions on with the cap, that they were really focused on academics, but with the lifting of the cap, we have seen that great increase of charter. And also North Carolina used to not allow for-profit charters, and that's been changed in the last 10 years. And that is a great concern of mine. Next slide. I just wanted to highlight a recent study by Helen Sunny Ladd, retired policy and economics professor from Duke University. She is not a anti-charter person. She is someone who has spent a long career looking at school economics and has found good things about charters as well as public education. But she had a recent report in November of last year that looking at finance and looking at economics found that charter schools are now undermining sound policies governing public education. And those are the four specifics that she cited, that they are fragmenting our coherent system of schools. They are not advancing to address child poverty and disadvantaged children. They are expanding, as I said, racial segregation and isolation, and they're not allowing for accountability for how public schools funding is being spent. So just wanted to reference y'all to that very excellent report that Dr. Ladd has put out. And one of her findings in that report was that that charter schools are close at a high rate compared to traditional public schools. Between 2015 and 2016, there was a finding that I had it here somewhere nationally. Within 3 years, a significant number of schools closed, charter schools closed. Here it's 18% of charter schools closed within the first 3 years, and that by the first 10 years, 40% of charter schools closed. So just that was between the years 1998 and 2014. So just, and that's a national statistic, but just a very significant concern. And to a specific example here in North Carolina that we had, Torchlight Academy was a 20-year school. It was around for since 1999 as one of our first charters. It was here in Raleigh. It had upwards of 600 students on its rolls at one point, but it has been a consistently low-performing school. They've always had the use of corporal punishment, which is concerning to me as a school board member. In the last 10 years, we rightfully were called upon to improve in Wake County the disproportionalities in student discipline that was clearly evident between Black and brown children and white children in Wake County, in the Wake County public school system. So I took that very seriously as a school board member. And Torchlight Academy, which is almost 100% Black and brown longtime use of corporal punishment at that school. But recently, last year, the Charter Schools Advisory Board did revoke the charter for Torchlight and ended and closed the school. It was found that there was a sweeps contract that the school had long used, and that between 2016 and 2020, the leaders of that school were paid nearly $3 million in public funding for management fees for that school of 600 students. Next slide. Here, just wanted to highlight this comes from a Newsline article, so I appreciate that source and outlining where the advisory board found the findings that led to the revoking of the charter for Torchlight, violating rules and regulations. They had particularly false records for their special education documentation. They had multiple fiscal management problems, as well as conflicts of interest that were clear. So that school closed last year, and many of those students have returned to the Wake County Public School System, and just a great concern of the lack of stability for those students. Next slide. So I have highlighted some of my concerns with charter schools. I think we can do better. I think we can do better integrating charter schools into a system where we learn from innovations from charter schools. And I think we need to make sure that charter schools are serving their initial purpose of being innovators. That's why they were founded. And I personally think that there's right now a lot more innovation happening in our public school systems than our charter schools. And I think that's something that we need to highlight and make sure that we're not falling into a false narrative that there's not innovation and that there's in our public schools. I would say that our public schools in Wake County are embracing 21st century education a lot more than some of our other competing schools, and that in many ways some of the private schools and charter schools that are coming to Wake County are looking toward 20th century education. So I want first and foremost to highlight that there are some solutions we can embrace. First, prohibiting for-profit charters. As I said, that was what once in place in North Carolina. I think we need to reinstate prohibition of for-profit charters. I would think we need to have a state moratorium on expansions of the number of charters and place the cap back on. I think we need to take account of what have we learned from the charter schools that have been in North Carolina. What have we learned? What can we replicate? And for that, I think we need to take a pause on the expansions of schools that are happening so rapidly in our state. There needs to be an increase in financial responsibility. I think we need to provide an analysis of the impacts, of specifically funding impacts that are happening on public schools. The lack of planning, for example, for capital and for school buildings is of a great concern and is greatly impacting taxpayers. I think we need to monitor special education offerings at schools and make sure that charter schools are being fair to students with special education needs. I've had too many anecdotal examples of charter schools that counsel students who have IEPs away from their school and back to the public school. Parents are very transparent when they're seeking readmission of their children back into the public school system, saying that it's because they've been counseled that they have an IEP that can't be served at other schools. Next slide, Yvonne. I think we need to require planning and better coordination with local school districts so that we can protect taxpayers. A lot of charters are opening in places where there are many seats still in public schools, so there's not a need to expand a school if there's not innovation going on. I think charter schools should be held accountable to fulfill the clearly stated requirement of having diversity in their student body, that their student body needs to reflect the community. You saw Rodney's slides that the schools are not reflecting the school communities in his county. So I think that was in the original 1996 legislation for charter schools, and I think charter schools should be held accountable to that initial requirement. I also think that we need to encourage magnets within unified school systems to promote school choice much more widely in our state. School choice is the movement we embrace. I think that can be done much more constructively and within public school systems. And I think it needs to be, it's much more financially responsible within public school systems, because it simply can be scaled in a way that is more efficient, both financially and in an equity point of view, to be fair to students. And then there's other states that have charter schools that are governed by local school boards that are publicly elected, that are accountable to the public. I will tell you, as you have seen, public school boards are hear from the public. School boards have public comment, they have emails. It's a very responsive audience that comes to school board meetings. So I think that is something, having transparency, having openness and governance is critically important for all public dollars. And that goes especially for public school dollars that are so important for our children. Public schools are compulsory and open to all children because our society, our state recognizes that children need opportunity through a public school system. It's so critical to the future of young people that they get an education, that our state and our nation puts public education first and foremost in funding. You know, Leandro, Rodney touched on Leandro. For 20 years, we have known what we need to do in North Carolina. We have a plan now from West Ed. The attorneys that have challenged and have worked on the Leandro case have won this case 3 times, and the state has not fully funded public education. And I think by pitting, charter schools and public and local public schools and making them competitors is undermining the entire process for kids. Kids need to have these opportunities in every single county. And we need to make sure that we're not getting diverted from the real issues, which is that public education is not fully funded in North Carolina. And we should be working together to make sure that we get the best schools possible for our kids, and that the taxpayers have transparency in those dollars. So I'm going to leave it now to our next slide, which is taking some questions. I know it popped up in the chat, Heather. I'm going to ask you to navigate that for us. I've not been able to keep up.
I've been watching the chat, and Rodney actually has answered a few questions. Do you want to maybe talk a little bit about the questions that you answered, Rodney? Just because I know when I'm listening to a webinar, I don't always catch everything that's going on in the chat, but then you had a couple about Hobgood that I thought were, totally worth.
Yes, I want to thank Ms. Irby, because I think when I was explaining that Halifax County Schools desegregation plan in 1969 had been rejected by the Justice Department, I didn't mention why it was rejected. I just said it was. So thank you, Ms. Irby, for calling me out on that. But it was rejected because it did not comply with the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And excuse me, on a side note, this is just a historian in me talking. There had been a case in Enfield, which is also in the southeastern section of Halifax County, where a establishment was not serving Black patrons. And the case went all the way to the United States Supreme Court. It's called Blow versus North Carolina. And the Supreme Court found in favor of the plaintiff, Robert Blow, who was one of the patrons who was arrested that day. And one of the reasons why was because because the establishments did not comply with the public accommodation section of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So that part of our county, for whatever reason, the southeastern part of our county has always been a little bit more politically active than the northwestern part, which is where I live. Not to say we haven't been politically active in our own right, but you tend to have more political things happen at that end of the county. That's also where the historic community of Tillery is located, if anybody's familiar with Tillery and the advocacy of the concerned citizens of Tillery when it comes to environmental justice. And I'm trying to see, did I see another question? I'm not sure, Ms. Irby, if Black families are applying to the school. I would assume they are. I'm not going to go out on a limb and say the enrollment is rigged. I'll let people make their own determination on that. But all I know is that Hobgood said it would use a weighted selection lottery with preference given to low-income students. And the predominantly Black population of Halifax County has not changed since antebellum. So I would assume that the majority of the poor citizens of Halifax County would happen to be Black citizens. So you would think that, you know, these Black children in that part of the county would have the opportunity to attend. But apparently they're not getting through the lottery process. So that's all I can really say to answer those questions.
And I also saw in the chat that, yes, some of the original charter legislation from the 90s was for charter schools to be innovative. That's why there was the cap of 100 that they wanted to, and one for each county, I think Rodney pointed out, but that they wanted the charter schools to be innovative, to try new things. That's why they didn't have to, that if you remember that chart that showed some of the exemptions from the state statutes that local school districts have to follow, the charter schools are exempt from many of the regulations in order to have some innovation. And as one example, charter schools do not have to adhere to the calendar law that we have in North Carolina. North Carolina is the only state that mandates and restricts the beginning of the school year as well as the end of the school year. And it was here in Wake County, creating a calendar was always a challenge because there's not as much time in between the restricted start and the restricted end to have some of the work days that we want. It's not enough to have, for example, high school exams finished before winter break, but charter schools are exempt from that, and they're able to construct these wonderful calendars that I always envied when I was on the school board. So I remember being, you know, an earnest school board member. I went down to the legislature and talked with some state senators and state House members and said, you know, I would love to tell you about how we would benefit from some relief on this calendar law. If you could change the calendar law. These charter schools are doing great work with the calendar, and they're finding they're almost all on doing these more modified calendars. So can we be like the charter schools that have been doing this for years? And that never came to pass. We had still, the local school districts still had to could not adapt that innovation. I guess that's my point, that I was trying to point out this innovation from charter schools, and it was not convincing them to lift those restrictions on the calendar law that had become so cumbersome for many of us that serve on public school boards, because it really is makes much more sense to do what charter schools are doing and have more school start sooner than August 25th, and go just be able to have a more structured calendar that's more responsive to children and teaching.
Christine, I just want to add to that question just a few quick comments. I remember when charter schools were first talked about and actually first started, and a lot of public education educators were in favor of an opportunity to have, if you would, a lab, a place where they could start a small charter with a small program where teachers could be innovative and they could design the curriculum and be intimately involved in what is taught and how they teach it, and that we were going to take all this stuff learned in this lab and we were going to transfer it. That was the whole theory, to best practices for all schools to learn from. Of course, we have never seen that happen since this program had begun. But I always thought that was interesting that that never happened. I think it's unfortunate that it didn't. And of course, you've already mentioned it was supposed to be innovative, but the other thing was it's supposed to offer kind of different choices that weren't available anywhere else. And of course, we haven't seen that happen either.
Well,
Right.
there's not been mechanisms for those idea sharings, which is instead it's just more of a competitive system, and a fragmentation that's of great concern to me. And I saw in the chat room before we leave the calendar, which has been one of my pet peeves, the resistance to changing the calendar law. It became that there were organized folks who wanted a longer summer. And some of that is in response to local businesses wanting their high school students to, as employees during the summer, to stay a little longer. That's one thing I've heard, but it's also just the tourism industry has long supported the calendar law in North Carolina. But now it just seems to be something that I would love to see changed. And every year the School Boards Association puts it at the top of their legislative agenda. And every year it doesn't go anywhere. But there have been a lot of local bills. I just think it needs to be statewide, it needs to finally happen. But we're the only state that restricts both the beginning and the end, we're an outlier. And I also saw in the chat a question around innovations that we have, where we have learned from charter schools. And there's a charter school in Wake County called Quest that had a shortened school day. And that has been a model that Wake County Public Schools has replicated. And we have a very successful model now called, a very successful school rather, called Crossroads Flex, where students who are high intense athletes, maybe they're trying out for, what they want to be Olympic athletes, or they are training for a specific an art. We have songwriters and singers who want to do auditions nationally, and they have gone to Crossroads Flex. It's been a really exciting option for our students. But we also have 6 early college models that I would point to as really innovative high schools here in Wake County, that we have 4 or 5 partnerships with Wake Tech Community College. We've got a partnership with NC State. I've learned how to do this as a Carolina grad. That's really hard, but I can still, NC State STEM Early College is here as part of Wake County Public School System. And then we have leadership academies that are partnered with historically Black University, St. Augustine's University. So we have these wonderful early colleges, and each of those schools is robustly diverse. And so we have been able to do these choice models within the magnet system and the choice system that we have here in Wake County. And we have had these innovations. They're small, wonderful high school models that I think allow choice for parents. And each of those schools is racially and socioeconomically diverse, targeting first-time college goers, but they are diverse and wonderful schools. So I think that's a success story where I think Wake County has done school choice in an exceptional way, that I think gives parents choice, but it doesn't undermine segregation, the integration rather of schools. It doesn't undermine a unified system of school choice for parents. So I think it's really important to point that out.
I want to come back to a question that was in the chat also, that they were talking about charter schools and funding, and just ask that if students go back to the traditional public school after the first few weeks, the charter school gets to keep this the state funding for the whole year, correct? Yeah, that the charter schools get funding in increments in 3 different allocations over the course of a year, but those allocations always go back and reference the first month of enrollment. So if there's an error in that first month, that, you know, they're only getting like 37% or something that at the beginning of the school year, then in the later allocations, they go back and just double check to make sure that they're allocating for the correct first month amount.
And there's a local portion that charter schools receive. They receive a state allotment, but then they also get from the county school system the portion of the local funding that goes to the local school system. And that's done on a monthly basis, I believe, by each LEA. But it is a lot for, you know, that it's through self-reporting. So our staff, the Wake County Public School System staff has to keep up with it and has to make sure that it's accurate, or work with the charter school to make sure it's accurate, but there's not accountability for how that funding is spent at the county level. As far as I know, it's, and I think it's just becomes more fragmented.
Ms. Irby, is your hand still up? You have a question? Just unmute yourself and ask.
Oh, okay. I didn't want to interrupt, but I just want to know, like, I'm originally from New York City, and I'm part of Parents Across America. So we've been, you know, just fighting privatization overall, right? And especially the charter school system. But I just wanted to know, are we gonna like really talk about some real solutions about, you know, what we're really dealing with? Because if we're talking about like choice, like I feel that parents that are choosing charter schools lots of times do not understand what they're choosing. And I don't know if we've done a really good job at really helping them to understand that you're choosing another school system. Because I'm a school board member, and sometimes we get emails from charter school parents asking for help, and we have to refer them back to their boards of education. And
Yes.
I just think that we need to like take another strategy, because if we can get parents not to enroll their children in the charter school system because they're choosing not to, and they understand what's going on, and the fact that we've never told parents that they are actually participating in an experiment, right? We're saying it's a lab. We've not used that kind of language in helping parents to really understand that system.
Point well taken. Well, one of the things that we're trying to do tonight is be part of that public education information to folks to make sure they understand. You saw the chart that Rodney had at the very beginning, at the end of his presentation, on the difference between charters and traditional public schools, local public schools. One of them is certified teachers. You know, charter schools only have to have half of their teaching staff be certified teachers. So that's alarming to me. Another thing I do want to make sure that somebody, Christine or Rodney, has a question about ESL. I saw that in here.
Yes, are there differences between traditional public schools and charter schools and their responsibility for teaching ESL needs students?
I think it depends on the charter school, but they're historically and nationally, as well as in North Carolina, Hispanic students, Latino students are underrepresented in charters compared to the demographics. I think that's true in Wake County. And so just statistically that is the case. But we do have charters that teach foreign language here in Wake County. But I think that gets to your point, Ms. Irby, that, you know, just it's are they exclusive or are they inclusive schools? And, you know, one of the endearing things about public education to me as a parent, as a citizen, is that our public schools are inclusive. All children are obligated and guaranteed a spot in a public school. And I think we are fragmenting that system by having more charter schools. I think the vouchers that are coming down are even more disruptive. I think the charter school movement needs to be advocates for public schools. If they truly want to identify as public schools, I think we need to have advocacy against these vouchers that are going to be even more disruptive to our unified system of public education in North Carolina. It's going to lead to more fragmentation. It's going to lead to less accountability. And I think that should be alarming to a charter school supporter who wants strong public schools. If you really identify as a public school, which I think a lot of charters do, you should be alarmed about the voucher and the privatization movement. You should be alarmed, in my opinion, about for-profit charters, because so much privatization is happening in states like Arizona, like Florida, and legislators here in North Carolina are looking to those states. And some of the privatization is going to bankrupt parts of Arizona, if you ask me. They're not sound ways of spending public dollars. And I think that should be alarming to the charter schools that really do care about maintaining a public school system that serves children. Because I do know that a lot of charter advocates view themselves as public schools. I think so. I would encourage folks who care about these issues to make sure that they are making their voices heard to the legislature.
And I want to just jump in here and I want to say two things quickly. If you have a question, please feel free to unmute yourself and just join the conversation also, okay? Because we may miss seeing your urgent waving and we might miss something in the comments. So this is a wonderful opportunity just to share thoughts and make comments and whatever. But I want to go ahead and just
Wait, Yvonne,
Yeah.
before you go in, I just do want to jump because I did ask someone to unmute who had a question in the chat that was pretty extensive, and I thought it would just be better for her to ask it herself. So
Yeah,
Emily,
Thank
go
you.
ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. I wasn't sure if we were gonna do questions in the chat.
Yeah.
So yeah, hi everyone. Thank you so much for these presentations. I'm a public school parent in Durham, and we have, I guess, similar to Wake County, we have so many charters here and just seems like they're popping up all over the place all the time. And have seen all of the concerns that have been shared in these presentations. And at the same time, I just wonder if we need to, in the spirit of realism and pragmatism, kind of reach across and join forces with some charter folks to lobby and advocate for, Leandro, for release of these funds that are going to benefit all of us. I feel like I've gotten this pretty strong vibe from a lot of public school advocates that we just don't talk to the charter people. Like, we don't like them. We don't want to play in the sandbox with them. We want them to go away. And I'm just like, they're not going away. Like, they're here to stay. And
Emily, I actually saw your question and I was holding off on answering it because it's kind of our closing comments.
oh, okay.
But
Great.
I'm
Yeah,
gonna
I
go
just
ahead
have been
and jump
thinking about
back.
this really
We're going to answer it now because Christine started the conversation when she said, right, join forces and work on some of these common impacts that are coming. And I do think that our position has always been that we want charter schools to support and be true to their mission and to be a complement to the public school system, not to be a competitor. I think that's really a model that we don't believe is effective. It doesn't help students succeed. It doesn't help teachers have to, teacher development and all those kind of things. And we have always said, I don't like to talk about that we've closed the school because of fraud, where the taxpayers have lost millions and millions of dollars and children have lost a year or 2 or 3 of education and something they may never recover from. And I don't like to see where charter schools are allowed to have different rules that some are negatively impact children and taxpayers, and some are positive, as Christine said, for taxpayers and children. But we're not allowed to do that in our traditional public schools. So we've been asking for a long time for more of a level playing field, and for charters to be transparent, and for to be held accountable and to be effective. Okay, and just like we've actually closed the school in Pembroke, North Carolina, a couple of years ago, right? Because he said it wasn't effective for children. They were not making academic growth. We're not closing charters for that reason. Almost every charter who's been closed has been because they gave up or they were accused of and found to be involved in fraud, financial mishandling, and those kind of things. So I agree with you. We are actually saying, you know, if charter schools really, really want to work with local school systems, they can. There is no barrier there for them to do that. There is no barrier. If charter schools really want to join us in saying, we don't care for the for-profit charter schools. We believe in our homegrown program. We bring in our professionals and our staff, and we think this is an effective, innovative program we have. We want to offer it to parents. So we would actually like for them to join forces with us and to help us put an end to the voucher program. Right now, I'm going to talk about that in just a second, but the voucher program itself could pretty much bankrupt the public education dollars in this state. Mm-hmm. And it not only threatens traditional public schools, it threatens charter schools too. Right. And you have a very good point, and it's not one, if anyone misrepresents, I'll say me or this organization as public advocacy, let me correct it now. We want charter schools to play by the rules. We want them to be effective. We want them to do all the things that school boards do. We invite them to participate in these solutions. Look at some of these bills that have been recently filed. Let me use a few of these to make an example, Emily, of what I'm saying. Remote and virtual charter. Even though these remotes and virtual charters have been dismal, the charter schools that are in person or hybrid now have success stories to tell at some level. Virtual charters have none. They have been dismal in terms of what they've done for children, but this bill is actually going to expand them, let them have longer time to be pilots and give them more students. Changing and taking away the Charter Review Board, taking that away from the public state board of education. Why? That is at least checks and balances. Okay, people are elected, they appoint members, all their meetings are public, their votes are public, their actions are public. So why would we take away a decent checks and balance to make sure that only quality charters are being established and only quality charters are being renewed? So instead, we're going to redo that and have an appointed board that's going to become politically motivated. Why? If for charter, so I said to the charter community, help us make y'all better. Help us make you strengthen. Work with your local school system. Don't compete with it. Don't open across the street and drain students and money away when all those those local school systems have fixed costs they can't change, right? So you take their kids out of their school, they still have all those fixed costs. Us taxpayers still have those fixed costs. All the guidelines for approving charter, going to be less guidelines, not more. So to me, if I am a charter school supporter, I would be alarmed with some of the language in some of these bills in terms of what they're going to allow happen to take more guardrails off instead of gaining the public trust and public education advocacy's trust in what they're doing. These bills go the opposite direction. So I want to jump now real quick to what Christine alluded to and got us in this conversation. Look at this school voucher bill. Just I want to touch on it just for a second because we're going to have a special webinar just on school vouchers, and I hope you'll all come back and join that conversation. because that's really the wolf at the door here. Okay, the wolf at the schoolhouse door are these private school vouchers, where we're going to take public tax dollars for public education, not put them in a charter, not put them in a traditional public school, but hand them out to private schools for private education, where there's no, I mean, if, you know, charter schools have some things they have to do like public schools. Private schools have no requirements. We don't know. They can hire somebody with a high school education to teach biology. It's okay with them. They don't have to have any certified teachers. They can have a religious requirement. You know, so I'll go on and on, but look at this one bill, the current eligibility. This program for school vouchers, right? Was set up when it started as initially was going to be very limited in size and scope, and it was really going to be a small program to allow poor, low income families to have an opportunity to choose a different setting or choose a private school setting. That was what was said when they started school vouchers. Currently, where it used to be like a family of four could make like $35,000 to qualify. Do you see what it says now? You can make up to $111,000 a year for a family of four, and you can qualify for a school voucher right now in North Carolina. And this new bill just keeps racking up the rate. And what it really says here at the very bottom is that if you are very rich and you are even a millionaire, you can get 45% of the per pupil expenditure given to you as a school voucher. Can you imagine that we ever had this as our intent, when in our Constitution for North Carolina, we said that every citizen deserved a high quality, free public education? That we meant we could send these to religious schools or to schools that have very little structure and have very little and don't have to prove what they're doing for kids. Private schools don't have to ever show you a receipt. They don't show the public how the money's spent. They don't share with us anything that their kids accomplish or don't accomplish. So this is the wolf at the schoolhouse door right now that really should alarm everybody. And the total amount of money, Heather, I can't read this, but what is it projected to be by the end of those? Heather, explain this chart here a little bit. You made a great chart here, and there's a red and blue. Can you explain that to everybody?
We don't see it on the screen, by the way.
You can't see it?
Yeah,
No.
I can
see
see it.
it.
Oh, I see the blue and red.
Yes, I can see it.
The blue and red.
Okay.
Can
I
you hear
don't
me?
see it on my screen.
I
I see you guys on my screen, but I don't see your chart.
I can
Well, we're going to
see
send
our
you these
sharing.
slides, okay? Ms. Irby, we're going to send these slides out later, but Heather made the chart that shows the original appropriation, how much money was given every year for vouchers in blue. And then the red shows the proposed new amount of money to spend on charters. And I think the thing I really want, on vouchers, I really want you to see is that they're talking about doubling the amount of money that we're already spending on vouchers. So Heather, I'm gonna let you explain this a little bit because you've
Well,
done
I think
research.
you got the gist of it, Yvonne. You know, starting in 25, 26, you can see that's $175 million a year jump right there from what the current allocation is. But even if you go back a couple of years, just last summer, they doubled it. You can see between 2023 and 24, that pretty much doubled. I mean, it's crazy how much they're increasing the allocations to the voucher system. So by the time you get up to about 2020, I can't see it very well either, but up to 2022, 23, that's more than $500 million, $500 million, $500 million each year, every single year being allocated to these opportunity scholarship vouchers. And as Yvonne is saying, you have people who are making well over, or anybody who's making over $246,000 a year, that even those folks are eligible for getting 45 of the per pupil expenditure. And where vouchers like this have expanded in other states, like in Arizona, in Wisconsin, the proportion of people getting these vouchers or applying, most of them never went to public schools. So they have always been in private schools. It's like 75, 80, 89% of the people who are getting this voucher money never went to public school. So this is basically a flat out transfer of public funds out of funds that could potentially be used to go to, you know, Halifax County Public Schools, for example, Weldon County Public Schools. It's going straight into the pockets of people who are already sending their kids to public schools who don't need it. And another thing I want to point out is in the budget, it's not on a slide here, but in the House budget, one of the things they did regarding the Opportunity Scholarship funding, oh, there it is. Yeah, I put it in here, is they crossed out a requirement for test performance to be submitted to the state, which is the authority, not DPI, but the authority that governs the Opportunity Scholarships. So previously, they had to give tests every now and then they did submit the data, but it wasn't public, you know, it wasn't publicly reported like it is for charter schools, the EOG scores, and it is for public schools or traditional public schools. A lot of transparency in terms of how the kids are doing in terms of academics there. For these Opportunity Scholarship vouchers, none. And now it is in the budget. They're completely dropping a requirement for test scores to even be submitted. So there's going to be no way legally, they're making it so there's no way to account for the academic quality via any sort of test score performance for these funds.
And
So,
if you think, and Heather, the other thing that they put collecting data on, but we've had a lot of data on for a long time before they did, is where what's going on in those private schools. If we think that charter schools are segregating families by race and income, hold on to your hats, because private schools are very, very exclusive in terms of income requirements. Most of the private schools require some application process where they can turn you down flat out. They require an adherence to, for example, a Catholic private school could say that you have to be a Catholic, or you have to, you know, there's a private school in Fayetteville that says you have to swear your allegiance to Jesus Christ. So we have a lot of these schools that have a lot of other layers of requirements to keep kids out, but which is absolutely against what we believe in, whether it's a charter school or traditional public school. On the surface, we say we don't do that, okay? But that's not our goal. And so the issues that Christine and Rodney have talked about earlier in terms of the purpose of public education tax dollars and what our goal as a society is being mutated incredibly in these school vouchers. So again, to Emily's point and to Christine's and Heather's, if we want to protect public education in North Carolina, this is something that requires a lot more discussion, and we're going to do that. We're going to ask you to come back sometime and join with us. I'm going to start heading towards wrapping this up, but I want to check first to make sure there aren't any other questions before I share the last few slides with you.
Well, and I wanted to add to what you just said, Yvonne, in that it's leading to a further fragmentation of public school of public dollars that are supposed to be educating our children. You know, across the country, the majority of children attend traditional public schools. And by fragmenting it, you know, into charters, for-profit charters, vouchers, homeschools, and siphoning off that funding, you're creating a have and have not system. And that is just injurious to children. And it's not inclusive of all children. My parents came here as immigrants. My father came at 15, not knowing any English, and his public school, in 3 years, he graduated and had learned English and was able to be a full citizen in America. And that is just one story from my family. And it's just countless ways that children have opportunity, regardless of the circumstances that in which they came into this world, through public education, to be full citizens in this country, in our society. And that's what's at stake with this fragmentation and siphoning off and privatization of what should be public funding going to educate children in our country. And that's what drives me to stay in this fight for public schools.
So I would add to that, that one of the things that always irks me a lot is I actually heard it today. And someone said, well, what are we supposed to do about failing schools? And my answer is, why do we have failing schools? The very same people who are throwing out anything goes with school vouchers, private school vouchers, anything goes with education savings account. A lot goes, we can relax the reins on charter schools. Those same people are the ones that are saying, well, if we have failing schools, we need to do something about
Well,
it.
and let's push
Answer
back
is-
on that narrative that public education and traditional public schools are outperforming a lot of alternative schools, other schools, and
Well,
especially given child poverty in this country.
Amen.
And so we have to recognize that our public schools are doing incredible work in recovering from a pandemic, and they're doing incredible work for the last several decades to increase standards and bring education into the 21st century. So I would push back on that narrative.
No, that's the truth narrative, truth to power here. But the other part of that narrative is, if our schools need more resources, why aren't we providing it? We're underfunding our public school system and then criticizing it for, quote, not meeting the needs of all our children, failing our children. So not only is it a false narrative, as Christine's pointed out, this isn't true. We do need more funding. We have been operating on budgets that are way underfunded and staffing that's not met. But these people, instead of our legislators too often, instead of fixing the problem at hand, making our unified system of public education stronger, now, as Christine said, we have fragmented to charter schools, traditional public schools, and voucher schools, private schools, all with different standards and rules and accountability and to the public. So anyway, I hope that that we didn't miss any questions last round. Is there anybody else that wants to ask a question or comment? Last chance.
I think
I'm going to take in my last chance. Oh, no, go ahead, please.
no, I was just going to say, I think that one of the things we need to keep in mind, we are in the South, and when the idea of traditional public schools for all people, at the time, black, white, or whatever, when that came about, it was during Reconstruction. The country was literally rebuilding itself, to try to achieve a more equal society for everyone included. And that idea was kind of put to the side when another movement started after Reconstruction called the Redeemer Movement or the Redemption Movement, where the integrated state legislatures made up of black and white legislators who were working together to try to create equitable systems, were replaced by majority white or all white legislatures who were basically trying to take it back to the way it used to be. And I think that's what we're seeing, not just here in North Carolina, but around the country. So this makes the whole idea of voting, access to the ballot and all those things more important. So it really comes down to putting pressure on those legislators, because at the end of the day, they're the ones who control the funding, and where kids are going to be taught about civics and economics and how their government works, if not in their traditional, not in public schools, in public education. I talk about it all the time in my classroom. So it really comes back, if you ask me, to putting pressure, like Yvonne is doing right now on the screen, putting pressure on those state legislators, which is going to be very hard, and then putting pressure on our neighbors to get out and vote for pro-public education candidates.
And Rodney, you've done my slide. Contact your lawmakers, right? These are the folks, and this is perfect summary of this. But look, if you agree with some of our concerns, if you think there are some great solutions that many have been talked about tonight, if you think, as Emily said, there's a way to improve charter schools and there's a way to integrate the charter schools and traditional public schools to make them more effective instead of having a negative impact on our local school systems, having a positive impact. If you believe any of those things are true, talk to your lawmaker. Go to this North Carolina legislature, NCGA, North Carolina General Assembly. You can type in your name, your address, and you can find your legislator. This is a number you can call, and you can call this number and say, I'd like to speak to Senator so-and-so. You will usually get their legislative assistant, and that's actually great because those people are trained to answer the phone. They're very polite. They're very nice. They will communicate who you are. I'm Rodney, and here's why I'm calling, and I'd love to have a conversation. And so really, they do count how many phone calls they get. They count their emails. And I think that especially if you consider taking the approach that we would like to take, which is how can we make things better? How can we make our school system stronger and how, work together? Then call them, let them know. Last thing I'll say is that I hope that you'll consider joining us. We have an event coming up on May 31st with Congressman Wiley Nickel and Senator Rachel Hunt, North Carolina, where we're going to be talking about a lot of these issues, what's going on in DC and all the way to North Carolina. In closing, if I don't say this, I'll get really in big trouble with the staff. Please connect with us. Okay, we're on Facebook. We, all our events like this, and we show the film Resilience about childhood trauma once a month. Our fundraiser event coming up in May. All of our events are on our Facebook. You can also go to Eventbrite and search for our tickets. Almost everything we do is free and open to the public. I invite you to go to our website. We have a ton of wonderful things, lots of informative fact sheets that Heather's put together, and many others. We have a blog. We invite you to participate in our blog. You may want to share your views on various public education issues. You just email us, info@publicschoolsfirstnc. We would love to have your input. So tonight, I just want to thank you. We will be sharing this recording on YouTube and probably sometime early next week. We will share these slides with you so that in case you miss some points or you would like to check back and see. And we are going to be announcing a webinar on school vouchers sometime in probably 2 or 3 weeks from now. We hope you'll come back and join us for that. So in closing, Rodney and Christine, thank you so much for your insightful comments. Heather, thank you for your hard work and research and the presentation of all the data and making sure that I don't mess up too bad. And all of you who've come tonight and shared your time with us, I greatly appreciate you. And I know that regardless of the particular viewpoint you may have, the fact that you will come and listen and learn other perspectives speaks highly of you. Regardless of how you fall on this issue, I enjoyed the opportunity to share our view with you and encourage you to figure out together how we can make sure that every child in North Carolina gets a high quality public education they deserve. That's part of the cornerstone of our democracy. It's what makes societies work. It's what makes our future doctors and nurses and firemen and women, our mechanics, that we have an effective public education system. So thank you all for being a part of that. And Christine and Rodney, I'll ask you to hang on as we say goodnight to our guests. Good night, everybody. Thanks for coming.